Yeah, so it's, yeah, I mean, from, as I said, my only concern initially was from the sketch of the property layout. It appears that there could be space that you could put the structure on that wouldn't require a variance, but you know, we have to use some good faith that if that's the case between where the well's located and other, whether it be trees on the property or you know, septic and things like that to get around, then certainly that would you know, prohibit those spaces. But it's hard to tell from the documentation that's submitted, but it is a fairly small shed. And you indicated there the current abutter of that is closest to that property line doesn't have any concerns. Were any documents submitted from the abutters?
Yeah, that's where we started, and just let her know we might not get to do this, but we might. And if you have any concerns, then we won't pursue that. And she wrote us a letter that said, I have no concerns, and I think we sent that in.
Okay. Did you have that, Erica?
You know, John, I don't know that I received that. Do you mind sending that again? Emailing
Sure.
that to me as well? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe we may have talked about it, but I don't know that I have it on record.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it went in with our paperwork.
With your paperwork?
Well, yeah, when we sent stuff in initially.
I scanned whatever I received. Let me see. Maybe it's attached to this. Yeah, I don't think so.
I remember when I went through whatever documents you forwarded to us earlier, Erica, it was just the, it stopped with the abutters list, but I could be,
Okay.
you know.
Well, we definitely have it. We can send it.
Yeah. Okay.
And are there any other abutters present in the meeting? Erica?
Yes. Oh, let me read through, make sure that there's no, no one's spoken up. Let me see if there's any chat messages. No chat messages have been received. Gerard, did you want the applicant to hit upon the other criteria or variances that they've outlined in their application?
Sure. I mean, I was just looking at those sections too, because you know, one of the questions with regard to the shape and topography, the fact there's no conforming, I thought that maybe that certainly addresses the first one, but if they can go through them, that's perfect. Then we have it on record, and we can discuss any questions they have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So John, we've hit, I think we've expanded upon that first criteria point. The second one talks about literal enforcement of the provision of the zoning bylaw would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, to the applicant. Can you expand upon that for the board?
Well, you know, like we said, we can't put it too many other spots. It didn't seem like there's anything that would work. And so we are hoping to put a new shed back there. And we just want to make sure that if a big vehicle has to drive around, it can't be too big no matter what, but something that won't be able to go across our front yard anymore because that's where the septic is. So they're going to have to go all the way around the house, up the driveway and to the left. So we just wanted to try to make sure that there would be room to do that. And
in reading your application, it says that basically, so you need a place to store your lawn equipment, right?
yes,
To maintain your property. That's why you need it. Okay.
Well, yeah, it seems like it's in the garage presently, so they can't have full use of their garage without.
yeah, we're parking in the driveway right now. It's really nice in the winter to hide inside.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, and then, so on 4.2.3, you say, not visible from the street or the neighbors, the abutting neighbors, fine with it. So if we have that letter from at least that one abutter, then we have some support for that, which,
Okay.
you know, I mean, it would be, if it's safe on the property and it's not, you know, eyesore from the street and or, you know, causing problems with the neighbors, then that certainly could go toward not being detrimental to the public good. And then on the last item, that desired relief can be granted without nullifying or substantially derogating from the intent of the bylaw. So that one there, what that is trying to say is, so typically a variance is supposed to be granted, you know, the preference would be we don't grant a variance because by nature of variance it derogates or it, you know, sort of goes against our bylaws, right? So,
Okay.
but we do grant variances, obviously, but we want to be sure that it's not a substantial, it doesn't substantially go against what the town would normally say is the requirement for a to meet the bylaws. So, to in your case here, you're talking about, well, you need some setbacks, but you only need them for a small part. I think, Erica, you said they were like 6 feet setbacks that they need.
So they're seeking 6.5 feet to the side yard and 12 feet into the rear yard.
Okay, great. So, so to the extent that, you know, you don't believe that because whether it doesn't encroach on a neighbor or, you know, if there's what reasons you would think that that doesn't, you know, seriously violate the intent of the bylaws. That's what that question is asking.
Right. And I don't think it's going to be an eyesore to anybody, although they might not like the color, but you know, it's not going to be in anybody else's property. It is going to be within that setback, but I don't think that that sounds like it's going to be detrimental to the bylaw.
Is it going to be the same color as your house, or is it?
I think, is it, what color is it going to be, honey?
Same colors.
Same color as the house, yes.
So if they don't have a problem with your house, they shouldn't have a problem with the color.
Right. Nobody's complained yet,
Yeah.
except us. Needs new paint.
Erica, can you go back to the map again of the layout? The other one? Yeah. So the curved area, is that a walkway?
That's a brick pathway, correct?
Okay. And do you know what as you have it laid out, you know the distance between the shed and the closest point of the walkway is right now?
I don't, to tell you the truth, but I tried to draw my shed to scale. So if it's 12 feet wide, I'm going to guess that it's closer to 14 or 15 feet between the corner of the shed and that brick pathway.
Okay, so the argument is that it can't be, the shed and the pathway can't be any closer because you need to be able to drive equipment around should you have to service a well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Any other questions from board members or anyone else on the line?
I think it would be important to just see the letter from the neighbor, okay?
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable having the letter on file before we make a decision. That's just my personal thing.
And that's not a problem. I just send that to Erica.
Yep.
Yeah,
Did you
John, I
receive
mean,
that?
if you could send it right now, I mean, I could call it up
Okay.
on my email.
Hang on, let's see if we can grab
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Do I have my stuff first?
I assume it's with, I don't know. We'll both be right back. We're gonna look.
Mhm.
Do we know if the abutter in question is on lot 1A, or are they in the rear of the applicant's property?
That's a good question as well.
What I'll do is I'll pull up our GIS mapping service, and we can take a look at the abutters.
'Cause it really looks like we have at least two abutters who are closely impacted by this.
No, it wouldn't let me. Somebody else was there.
Mr. Chairman, we have some hands up from Martha Remington over there.
Okay.
Rana has a question. Wanted to know where the location of the well is on the property.
Right. But we'll have to wait for the applicant.
Mr. Chairman, have the speaker identify herself.
Rana Balco, Green Road.
Thanks, Rhoda.
You're welcome. I just wondered where the well was located, if the front is all the septic. You don't want to be driving over the well. I don't know. Where is the well? It should be shown on the map.
Rona, from what the applicant mentioned earlier, it seems it's on the back side, on the right side of this drawing, somewhere from on opposite the porch and down that way. I didn't see it specifically located, but he can speak to that when he comes back online.
Yeah.
'Cause that's where he said they needed to be able to get around that corner, and they didn't want heavy equipment on the well, driving over the well essentially.
So Gerard, I just pulled up Bolton's GIS mapping. So this parcel here that's highlighted is 48 Manor Road.
Right.
Town property is in the rear, so I believe the abutter that he must be referring to is here.
Right. Okay.
This is Manor Road.
Right, and it's this corner where, I don't know if you see my mouse, over here where the shed is, right?
Can you see where I'm pointing on the screen?
Yeah.
I believe
Mhm.
this is the location here.
Okay.
So I believe that, actually, let me turn the aerial on and see if we can see a little more detail.
Mhm.
Yeah, so here's the driveway coming in. There must be a brick pathway that goes around here.
So we believe it's probably the 4C-16 abutter where the letter's from.
That would be my understanding, correct?
And we are not locating it too easily. Look in one last place.
Yeah, because if we don't have that document, what we could do is we could continue the hearing, because we have a 6:30 hearing scheduled as well. And we
Yeah.
could, schedule a continuation to another date, and then we could make sure we have the documents that are necessary, and then we could wrap it up at that time.
Okay, do you guys have any idea what that date might be?
So the next meeting
Eric,
date is
hold it.
August. The next meeting date is August 25th. We already have a hearing scheduled for 6 p.m. Gerard, I don't know how much time we want to allot for that hearing at present.
what's on that hearing date?
That's the
That's
Woods
just
at Farm Road.
Which is Farm Road. Yeah, I mean,
Would
we
it be
could-
possible to make the decision subject to receipt of that document? Or are we concerned about the wording?
I'm concerned that we won't get the document, and then I'm not exactly sure how because then I think the board would have to opine whether or not to deny it, and I wouldn't have that. So I wouldn't want to close the hearing without really having that direction.
Okay.
Yeah, I
What
would
if-
be more comfortable having the document before we decide.
What if we continue to the 25th, but can we start the meeting at 5:30?
I was gonna say 5:30, 5:45. If it's just the review of a document, it may be easy to wrap it up. But if 5:30 is fine for me, I just don't want to impact your evenings, unless you're all available.
That works
I really
fine.
don't think this takes, if they can provide the document prior, it's really just the board opening the hearing, closing the hearing, and then taking a vote. So can we make it for 5:45?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. So we have a motion to continue to 5:45 on August 25th.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, Gerard Ahern,
Yes,
Brian Holmes,
Yes.
Andy Kistutz,
Yes.
Bradley Reed,
Yes.
Kay Stoner.
Yes.
okay, perfect. So we'll continue that hearing on August 25th at 5:45 p.m. All set then, Erica?
I am all set, yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for participating, and we'll look forward to following up later in August.
Okay, 5:45 on August the 25th.
Correct.
Thank you. All right, thank you, folks.
Yes, thank you. Bye. So, Erica, is this line still good for the next hearing?
It is, yes.
I don't have to call in a second time. Okay, perfect.
No, no calling it again. I will pull up the agenda.
Oh, a lot more boxes on this one. Okay. So, Erica, will you have to do a roll call to start, and then you can do the administrative aspects of Zoom, and then
Sure, I can take roll call.
yeah.
Gerard Ahern,
Present.
Brian Holmes,
Present.
Andy Kistutz,
Present?
Bradley Reed,
Present.
and Kay Stoner.
Present.
All right,
Okay.
full board is present.
Okay. Do you want me to read the public hearing this time, or do you want to do the Zoom highlights first, Erica?
It doesn't matter to me, Gerard. I'm happy to go through it first if you'd like.
All right. Well, let me read the public hearing notice, and then you can describe the Zoom sort of protocols. All right.
Okay.
So in accordance with the Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 11, notice is hereby given that the Bolton Zoning Board of Appeals will hold a public hearing on Monday, August 10th at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom Video Communications Inc. Zoom to act upon an amended decision regarding a revised comprehensive permit on remand from the Housing Appeals Committee for the Still River Commons 40B project. The applicant, Still River Commons LLC seeks to build a 4 single-family dwelling units located in Bolton's residential zoning district. on Still River Road identified on Assessors Map 8B as parcel 32. The modified development will contain one affordable unit in conformance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40B. Okay, so with that, Erica, why don't you just go over the Zoom protocols we're going to use, and then we'll get right into it.
Sure. So the protocols are very similar to a public hearing if we were attending a public hearing in person. So really, you just need to wait to participate once Gerard opens it up to public comment. So specific protocols relating to Zoom. If you enter with a personal computer, we ask that you rename yourselves with your official first and last name. It's encouraged that you click on the participants feature in Zoom to view all participants and to use the chat and raise hand feature. Gerard has identified himself as the chair. We've conducted a roll call. All participants, excluding board members, will be muted throughout the meeting unless called upon by the chairman. So if you're not muted yet, please mute yourself. All participants required to state their name and address when called upon by the chairman. Participants called upon more than once should restate their name. Documents shared throughout the meeting will be displayed at the discretion of the board and/or town planner. That would be me. If and when the chairman allows for public comment questions, this is a public hearing, so there will be a public comment period. It will be conducted as follows. The chair will read public comments, questions received in advance of the meeting, followed by real-time board and/or applicant responses. The chairman will read real-time comments, questions typed by computer participants in the chat featured, followed by real-time board and/or applicant responses. We just ask that if you make a comment or question in chat, that you have your settings set to 2 so that everyone participating in the meeting can see it. The chairman will then call on participants one by one with the raised hand feature, followed by the board and/or applicant responses. Computer participants can click on raised hand to be called on. Participants accessing the meeting by telephone can type *9 to raise their hand. The chairman will ask if any other participants accessing the meeting have comments or questions. Participants accessing the meeting by telephone can type *6 to mute and unmute themselves. And then again, just all votes of the board will be taken by roll call, since this is a virtual meeting.
Perfect. Okay, with that said, then just by way of background, so tonight we have in front of the ZBA the proposed amended decision for the Still River Commons 40B project. This matter, or this project, originally came before the ZBA in August of 2018, when Still River submitted an application for a comprehensive permit to construct 8 condominium dwelling type units on the property. The original application proposed a condominium development consisting of 4 2-unit duplex style buildings located on 2 lots containing 2 affordable units. In April of 2019, after the close of the public hearing process for the application, the ZBA voted to deny the permit. Subsequently, the Still River Commons LLC applicant, they appealed the ZBA's decision to the Housing Appeals Committee in May of 2019. So it's been in the Housing Appeals Committee since May 2019. And then, but even since then, as you're aware, the town has not yet achieved its 10% threshold of affordable housing to obtain what is considered a safe harbor in Chapter 40B developments. As a result, the burden on the town is to sustain the denial of a Chapter 40B comprehensive permit. That burden is fairly high. In the Hsc Appeal, the issue is whether the board's denial of a comprehensive permit is consistent with local needs. And that term, consistent with local needs, is sort of a term of art under Chapter 40B, Section 20. consistent with local needs is defined as requirements and regulations shall be considered consistent with local needs if they are reasonable in view of the regional need for low and moderate income housing, with the number of low and income housing persons in the city or town affected, and the need to protect the health and safety of the occupants of the proposed housing or the residents of the city or town, to promote better site and building design in relation to the surroundings, or to preserve open space, and if such requirements and regulations are applied as equally as possible to the subsidized and unsubsidized housing. So to sustain a denial of the 40B application at the HAC and ultimately in court, the town would need to show the health and other local concern that, one, support the denial, two, is not adequately addressed by compliance with state standards, and three, outweighs the regional housing need. So at the appeals was pending in 19 and 20, the town's law committee, in consultation with town council, town officials, and the town technical consultants, analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of the town's position to the Hsc Appeal. After weighing costs and potential benefits of further litigation, and with input from town scientific and technical consultants and town council, the law committee and ZBA agreed to negotiate a potential resolution of the Hsc Appeal with the applicant. So the settlement of the dispute is, always almost difficult, and it's by definition a compromise, meaning that there are advantages and disadvantages of the resolution. So both the town and the developer were required to make difficult concessions in order to achieve a resolution, although it may not be the preferred choice of some of the residents. The law committee and the ZBA believe the settlement is ultimately in the best interest of the town and the residents. The town entered into the settlement agreement with Still River in June of this year. So under the terms of the settlement, Still River submitted a revised comprehensive permit plan consisting of 4 single-family homes, each home with 3 bedrooms. One of the single-family homes will be affordable. The revised project reduces the size of the septic system needed for the project from 18 to 12 bedrooms. It also reduces the stormwater and wetlands impacts of the project, and the number of local waivers needed decreased from 32 waivers requests to 8. So pursuant to the settlement agreement, Still River and the town requested a remand from the HAC, which is the Housing Appeals Committee, so the board could conduct tonight's hearing and consider the revised plan. You may recall that the applicant chose to delay the filing of the notice of intent with the Conservation Commission. Under the settlement agreement, the applicant will still need to do so, filing that plan and obtain an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission. In addition, the settlement agreement does not infringe upon any appeal right by any of the abutters. So at this point, I'll invite the applicant to provide a more comprehensive review of the revised plan for the benefit of the board and the public participants this evening. Following the applicant's presentation, we'll have board members comment, and then after any board member comments, we'll ask the law committee members that are present to weigh in on the resolution, as they were well involved in this process, and then we'll ask questions from the public as well. So that's the plan of attack, and thanks for allowing me to take that first few minutes to give us a summary of how we got to where we are. So with that, why don't the applicant give us an overview of the revised application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Erica. Appreciate you adding it to tonight's agenda and accommodating the challenges of the pandemic and the new normal with our regular Zoom meetings. I know this is not ideal. It's not quite the same having an opportunity to be face-to-face with you, but again, I appreciate the opportunity to present our revised project. So you'll recall that I represent Still River Road Development LLC. Bob, a representative of that LLC, is joining us tonight, as is Seth Donahoe, who did the engineering on the original project and, of course, has done the engineering on the revised project as well. So what I'd like to do tonight, for the benefit of the board members who I know have some familiarity with the modified plan because of the settlement discussions that have occurred in the course of the HHE proceedings, but also for the benefit of the public, I'd like to, I think I'm getting a little feedback. Seth, can you mute yourself? Sorry. Thank you. So for the benefit of the board, as well as for the benefit of the public, I'd like to just briefly reiterate a bit of what the chairman had to say. I appreciate the introduction, and I concur entirely with the statements that were made relative to process and procedure. I've been on both sides of the 40B debate. I've represented municipal boards, and I've represented applicants. And I can certainly appreciate what's involved in a negotiated remand, and the fact that it is a compromise between the parties. So I suspect that there may be some continued issues or concerns that board members or the public may have and they want to talk through tonight. And certainly there are concessions that have been made by the applicant. But I'd like to walk through some of the highlights of the revised project. I'm going to be brief in my remarks, and then once I give that brief introduction, I'm going to quickly yield the floor to Seth Donahoe, because I'd like for him to walk you through the project plans. I think it'll be helpful, especially in the Zoom format, to have those plans on the screen when Seth makes his presentation, and he can certainly speak to those plans much more eloquently than I can. So in a nutshell, as you heard the chairman just say, the revised proposal for the site reduces the number of units from 8 duplex units to 4 single-family homes. The result of that is that we are reducing the number of bedrooms from 18 bedrooms to 12 bedrooms total on the site. That, of course, in turn reduces the requirements for septic systems for the size of that septic system. We have reduced the overall footprint of buildings in the course of the redesign, and as a result of that footprint reduction, we, of course, have therefore improved stormwater management. We've incorporated certain low-impact development measures that were strongly advocated for by municipal staff in the course of those settlement discussions, and so we've been able to incorporate those into the revised plan. We've reduced, as you might imagine, by virtue of shrinking the overall footprint of the project, we've reduced disturbances to wetland resource areas, specifically to the buffers to those resource areas, and therefore it's a more environmentally friendly project than it was before. We've increased offsets between the wetlands and dwellings. So all dwellings are currently positioned outside of the locally regulated 25-foot wetland buffer zone, which is important. As we had discussed previously when we were before the zoning board, and I appreciate that this is not something that's typically within the zoning board's purview, but thanks to Chapter 40B, the zoning board assumes the responsibilities of the Conservation Commission with regard to the local bylaw. So the 25-foot no disturb zone or no build zone is a concern for the municipality, and it is for many. That is a local regulation that is more stringent than what's provided for under the Wetlands Protection Act. It's something that we can seek waivers from under the 40B process, but as I just described, as a consequence of the redesign, all of the dwellings that we're proposing are now positioned outside of the locally regulated 25-foot zone. And all of the units still meet the front, side, and rear yard setbacks that are specified by the town's zoning bylaw. You'll recall that this is a very condensed development in terms of the actual footprint of the development site. About 95% of the site is going to remain developed, and so that's a critical sort of highlight of this project. The fact that it's only a relatively small footprint, and so there's no issue with setbacks. We are a far distance from all of our boundaries. As the chairman had alluded to also a few moments ago, we previously had sought 32 waivers from local bylaws, both general bylaws and zoning bylaws. We've reduced that number to 8 waivers. Waivers are still required. They almost always are with a Chapter 40B project, but the reduction in waivers is something, again, that was negotiated through the settlement discussions that occurred while the HAC proceedings were underway. I'm not going to get into the particulars concerning flood storage and the specifics of low impact development and vegetation and so forth, because I'm not the expert in that regard. Seth is. And so what I'd like to do, as I had said a moment ago, is I'd like to defer to Seth in that regard, allow him to present the project plans. And then once he does that, if he'll yield the floor back to me, I'll address some of the additional conditions that have been discussed with the zoning board and specifically with town council as potential conditions of approval that would provide additional protections for the town. And with that, Seth, if you could take the floor and present the revised plans.
Hey, Adam, thanks for that overall presentation. And Seth, before you start your comments, wherever you can highlight the difference from the original plans that people would have been more familiar with to the current plans and the benefits perceived, that would be helpful.
I'd be happy to. So for the record, my name is Seth Dono. I'm with Ducharme Mandela Civil Design Group. We are the engineers and surveyors that have assisted in part of the permitting process for this project that began with what you originally saw, and also we have worked with the developer as he has discussed changes with the town throughout this process. Eric, would it be possible to put up the plan called 339 Exhibit Remand? Thank you very much. So this plan has some red circled letters, and those correspond to some of the improvements that we were asked to make as we work through this process. And I'll go through those briefly for you. As Attorney Costa mentioned, the first thing that we were asked to do is reduce the number of units. So originally what was proposed was 8 units, and that was in 4 duplex buildings. As we reduced the number of units, we were also able to increase the offset to wetlands. And with that also came a reduction in the impervious area and an increase in the parking on the site. Previously, we had units that only had a 1-car garage. Now half of our units have a 2-car garage, and there's also additional parking in the driveways for each unit. As Attorney Costa mentioned, we are distant from our required zoning setbacks. The front required zoning setback at the site is 50 feet. Our closest point is the deck of Unit 1, which is 99.5 feet, so almost double the required setback, and all of our other units are over double the required front setback. In respect to the required side setbacks, that's 20 feet at this site. Our closest point is 115 feet, so we're over 5 times the required side setback. These units are clustered at the end of a shared driveway, and the shared driveway in itself represents a significant reduction in impervious area, which is a dramatic improvement over the previously presented plan. We have almost a 5,000 square foot reduction in pavement alone at this site. The next thing we looked at was the septic systems that would be associated with the units, and that's the circled letter B near the front of the site. The septic systems are in full compliance with the state environmental code, which is also known as Title V. And it also meets the sizing guidelines required by the state environmental code and the local board of health regulations. Because we've reduced the number of units and the associated number of bedrooms, that's how the septic systems are sized. We're able to reduce the size of the system, which in turn led to an increased offset to the wetlands on the northern side of the project. As we reduce the impervious area of the site, we'll go to letter C. There's some areas north of the proposed driveway, and they have some symbols for some plantings in them. And those are important because we were asked to incorporate some of the state's low impact development standards. It's often abbreviated as LID. The goal of the low impact development standards is to capture water on site and filter it through vegetation. And that's exactly what we're proposing in these 2 areas. So the runoff from our impervious surfaces will flow to those stormwater management areas, and those areas are designed to completely contain storm events up to the 100-year storm. And that's really the standard that we look to achieve, and really the highest standard when we're looking at developing a subdivision or any type of development like this. There is a overflow weir on each stormwater management area. And as I said, it would be unlikely that those would be utilized. But even if there were back-to-back 100-year storms, that overflow weir would control any outfall. So our basins would not be overtopped. There would only be controlled runoff of mitigated stormwater in those areas. Another benefit of the low impact development standards is that it looks to completely, or as much as possible, eliminate subsurface infrastructure. So our original proposed plan had a area of buried chambers underneath the turnaround area. So those wouldn't be seen normally, and they were designed and sized to collect runoff underneath the pavement. By eliminating the subsurface infrastructure, it greatly simplifies both the construction, which in turn leads to better protections to the environment. And it also, from a long-term use standpoint, it's something that's highly visible so that it can clearly be seen that it's functioning as designed. As we moved on, we, as I mentioned with the first item, as we reduced the number of units, we were also able to reduce the setbacks to wetlands. That's letter D, and the closest point is just south of Unit 2. So Unit 2's deck would be the closest point here. Before we had units themselves within 25 feet of the wetlands, and now the entirety of all the units are outside of the 25-foot wetland buffer zone.
The worst part is I can't even turn it.
And that's a great improvement over the prior design.
So loud I have to have it.
Part of the 25-foot buffer that's the hash dark line all around the property.
That is. So what you'll see is that it's only relevant to that deck. The other units themselves are greater than 50 feet, some greater than 75 feet from the wetlands.
Right.
So that there's a dramatic increase in the offset between the wetlands and the units themselves.
We need to cut your nails. Maybe tomorrow. Yeah, you did a month.
Item E, which is actually on the north side of the site, we're proposing a compensatory flood storage area. And there's a small area of floodplain on the site. And the proposed project will actually increase the flood storage on the site. And that's going to be a benefit to the surrounding properties as a whole. So that area, as any area of floodplain is altered, we're required to replicate it at a 1-to-1 ratio. We've exceeded that here. We're providing more flood storage, and that'll in turn provide stormwater damage prevention to the surrounding properties as well. Item F is along Still River Road. If you drove by the site, there is limited vegetation in that area, and what vegetation is there is becoming choked out by some invasive plants, and we've turned in an invasive management report which prescribes how to remove those plants, and then we're proposing to supplement those with plantings on the site, and those are specifically native plantings. That's something we were asked to change on the original designs, and we've maintained that all the way through. So the goal of this would be to enhance the vegetation within the right-of-way, and then also to enhance the view by providing plantings on our site as part of the project. When we previously discussed this project, we were requested to implement some improvements to the Still River Road drainage system. There's very limited catch basins on Still River Road. Most of the stormwater flows down the gutter line. And so the circle G area, there is an area that will intercept some of that runoff, get it off the road, and then pipe it to a depression. And that depression will allow any type of road sand, salt, any type of debris to filter out before it overflows towards a wetland area. So it's like the compensatory flood storage, that's something that's been designed to benefit areas off the project site as well. And finally, item H, we have a turnaround area that we have reduced from what we had proposed before. The prior project had a cul-de-sac style turnaround. This has a widened turning area, and that again attributes to over a 5,000 square foot reduction in the impervious area on the site, which is a great benefit to the stormwater management system and the adjacent wetlands. And item I is to the right of the screen, and that's actually the area beyond our project. As part of the discussions, as we've gone through this, we were asked to consider, and the applicant has chosen to either protect or permanently restrict the portion of the property which is not being used for the project. And Erica, if I could ask you to switch to the Locus Map. So there is a green hatched and highlighted area, and you can see the footprint of our project. The footprint of our project is relatively small, whereas the hatched area, that represents over 5.5 acres of areas that will be protected as part of this project. And it's important to note that the Bolton Conservation Trust actually owns the land directly to the east of that too. So this would act as a potential greenway between the existing Conservation Trust land and Still River Road at the Harbor Town line. So that's a summary of the improvements that we have made to the project. And I'd be happy to turn it back to Attorney Costa if you would like to add anything else.
Hey, Seth, just with regard to your comment on, I think it was with the turnarounds. Well, you said you reduced the turnaround. That all that is still would be comply with whatever the fire trucks or safety vehicles to get in and around, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey. Good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So thank you, Seth. Again, this is Adam Costa representing the applicant. So again, I will be brief in sort of my concluding remarks, but I did want to highlight, as I had made mention of in my introduction, a few conditions that had been discussed. To some extent, some of these topics were discussed with the Zoning Board of Appeals when we were last before you over a year ago. But many of these all of these have been further discussed with staff through council in the context of the settlement discussions that have been ongoing for many months. So the first one that I was going to touch upon, although Seth has just addressed it, is this concept of open space protection. So we have adopted a comprehensive proposed condition to obligate us to designate the 5.58 acres of wetlands and open meadows as open space area. And it would initially be subject to a declaration of restriction. That's a temporary but immediate measure, and that allows for the negotiation with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts with a more permanent conservation restriction that would likely be issued under the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. And so we've committed to follow through with that process so as to designate that land permanent open space, subject to a restriction that would run in perpetuity to ensure that there is never any development of the remainder of the site. Additionally, and again, something that Seth had made mention of in connection with stormwater and erosion control management, we have committed to ensure that there is a site supervisor on site during construction of the project that is competent with respect to stormwater and erosion control management, so that that individual can be responsible for frequent checks of the property before, during, after storm events, including on weekends and on evenings, to ensure that there is no untreated stormwater that's leaving the property during the development or construction stage of the process. We agreed to sprinkler the dwelling units, which is not something that would typically be required, as aware of with larger scale development, multi-family development, single buildings. There is a requirement in the Massachusetts State Building Code and the Fire Code that those buildings be sprinkler. That is not typically a requirement with single family homes, but that is something that is incorporated into this project and that we are proposing as a condition. A topic that had been the subject of some discussion in the proceedings previously was this idea of excess parking, or I guess maybe I should say a concern with insufficiency of parking. And I heard at least one, probably multiple residents comment on concerns associated with parking on Still River Road or on Vaughan Hill Road. And so as Seth had made mention of, we have designed this project such that number one, 2 of these 4 units will have 2 as opposed to 1-car garages, providing an additional space for each of those units. Number 2, we have provided additional driveway parking that didn't exist previously. So now there is more parking on site. And of course, number 3, there are now fewer units on site, so and a fewer overall number of bedrooms on site. And so our expectation would be that there will be sufficient parking available on site, And again, we have proposed to incorporate a condition of approval that there would be no parking on Still River Road or on Vaughan Hill Road, that all residents that are parking would have to be within the designated parking areas for each of the single family homes that are part of the proposal. Something that board members may recall as well, and maybe the public will too, is that when we last before you a year ago, and over the course of, I think we had 11 total sessions of the public hearing, there was feedback received from the design review board. Some of that feedback was sent directly to the board. Some feedback was also received directly by the applicant in connection with a meeting that the applicant had with that board. And so through the course of the settlement discussions, there were a number of requests that were made to the design review board with respect to the architectural design and the general or overall aesthetic of the development. And so there are a variety of provisions that are proposed as part of an approval in the form of a condition that the architectural design of the homes will be consistent with some updated renderings that we provided to the board, specifying things like window sizes and identifying the type of siding that we'll use and the type of roofing shingles that we'll use and so forth in a manner that we think is consistent, we know is consistent with the design review board's requests. And again, those have been vetted already by the design review board. We've also committed to ensure that there are differences within the development with respect to siding colors, so that number one, they're subdued and consistent with both the neighborhoods, but number two, that they're not all exactly the same color, so that you don't have that uniformity within the development. Got a difference of color siding, so that's something that we've committed to as well. And then the last item I want to make reference to is there was some concern about the preservation of existing trees. And so obviously in connection with any sort of a development of this sort, and specifically in this case with regard to gaining access to the site, there is some minimal tree removal required. But we've committed as a part of a proposed condition to limit the removal of existing trees of any meaningful size. So typically, diameter of 1.5 inches or more, that would be within the public right of way. Obviously, they'd require approval from the tree warden, but also limiting the extent of removal of any vegetated buffer from the site so as to preserve it to the extent that we can. So these are all proposed conditions that, again, have been negotiated through the course of the settlement discussions in the context of the HAC proceeding. We do believe that this is an improved development. I'm going to recommend that my client not speak, because I think my client's perspective would be that obviously this is not as favorable a development from the developer's perspective, but at the same time it is a development that through compromise is half the size in terms of number of units than what was proposed previously. A meaningful reduction in the bedrooms, a meaningful reduction with respect to footprint and with respect to encroachments on areas that we know were of some importance, significant importance to members of the board, members of the public, members of other local boards in Bolton. So we believe that this is a fair compromise, and we're hopeful that the board will feel the same way. And again, we're certainly happy to answer any outstanding questions or concerns that board members might have, and do our best to address any reasonable comments that members of the public might have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney Costa. So I asked a couple questions throughout the presentation, but any other board members have any questions or concerns for either Attorney Costa or Seth Donahoe at this time?
I do not at the moment.
Okay, good. I was gonna say, if anyone could, if you just confirm, because I can't tell people I'm muting, and I don't want to have awkward silence if necessary.
Yeah. No questions.
No questions, Kate? All right. Andy or Brad?
No questions.
Okay. All right. So,
No question. Brad?
Perfect. Thanks, Brad. I believe we have some members from the law committee on the Zoom meeting. To the extent they have any feedback or want to address just the process of how we got here, certainly we'll love to hear from the law committee.
This is Bob Sikansky. I have no questions or comments at this time.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
This is Stan Wysocki, Bolton Selectman. We went through a very exhaustive process with the applicant, looking at a whole variety of potential options. And I think the option that we've come up with is probably the best compromise that we could come up with. We looked at many different things, looking at alternative properties and the like. And I think for where we are and whether or not we would be able to prevail in any contesting of environmental conditions, which we could not, I think we have come up with probably the best solution we can given the piece of property. We've reduced the footprint, we've reduced the number of bedrooms, we've reduced the septic system, and I think it's a reasonable compromise for both the town and the developer.
Thank you, Stan. If that is the extent of the board or other bodies' input, then would like to open it up. Erica, are there any questions from the public that are attending the meeting at this time?
Yes, raise your hand. They can't see you. Just again.
Erica, you're muted.
Thank you. I do that all the time. It's a bad habit. I believe I heard Rhoda and Martha talking. I believe they may have a comment.
Okay. Please identify yourself and then ask your question or provide your comment.
Rhonda Balco, Green Road. I have two questions. Has the town requiring the developer to set aside monies for corrections on flooding or lawsuits from homeowners down the road, so that the town is not being sued for negligence on their part?
I think in the decision, the only fee that I see is that the applicant is going to provide is correct me if I'm wrong, Erica, there's a $5,000 deposit, and that would be used for during the project. I don't believe there's any provision for subsequent to the project.
Correct. That funding is for construction oversight.
Mm-hmm.
For an engineer to be out there reviewing the construction work.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to comment on that as well.
Okay, this is Dave McKay, our town council.
Good evening, everyone. Like the chairman said, Dave McKay from Myrick O'Connell on behalf of the town. Ms. Balco, that was not a provision that was in the original 40B application or an issue that was part of the original decision. That was also not something that we negotiated in the context of the settlement agreement. And I would add to that that that's not the kind of provision that you would typically have in either a 40B comprehensive permit or in most projects of this type. So the short answer to your question is no, but the more expanded answer is that that would be extremely unusual to require, and it would be difficult to require a developer or a project like this to provide the kind of indemnity that you're asking about. And normally the procedure to ensure compliance is to simply ensure compliance with the requirements of the permit itself. So that's how stormwater issues, wetlands, et cetera, would be managed. I would add to that also that the applicant has not yet gone through Conservation Commission approval. So a notice of intent has not been filed, and an order of conditions has not been granted by the Conservation Commission. So that process will still need to go forward. And my expectation, from what I understand, is that the applicant, as is their right, will do that at the conclusion of this process.
Thank you, Dave.
Rona, did you have a second question? You said you had a second question?
No, we did make requirements in the past, so I just wondered why this isn't happening, especially where it's a wet meadow and these people are going to be flooded.
Yeah. I can't speak to the past. I don't recall that provision.
Gerard, we have a raised hand by Bob Martell.
Okay. You can unmute him and have him ask his question and just identify himself and his location.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Bob Martell, 302 Vaughan Hill Road. Following up on a question that I had sent Erica by email, and there was some response from the developer in regards to septic location. So I had sent you a copy of a drawing from the comprehensive permit that shows some different locations than what was depicted in the drawing put up in this evening's meeting with regards to septic locations in front of each property. I'm assuming those are the septic tank and D box versus the leaching field. Yeah, do you have my email or that drawing handy?
So Bob, I'm pulling up on the screen from the revised plan. This is the utility plan. So this shows the septic tanks, and then the subsequent infrastructure, and then the leaching field here.
Right. So my question was specifically in regards to the tanks as their location relative to the snow storage areas, which do not appear in this drawing, but on another drawing that did depict those snow storage areas, it appeared that they were at least partially, if not in some cases entirely, overlapping the septic tank area. And my concern is that the weight of packed snow, especially if it's piled to any kind of depth, which it's not uncommon to have 6-foot snowpacks around these parts in an average winter, and the weight of that snow, especially if densely packed, could approximate the weight of, say, an F-150. About 4,800 pounds is what I estimated. And of course, that's generally a practice that's not recommended. Driving a vehicle over your septic area or putting that kind of weight on there. Another thing I would be concerned with is parking. Sometimes people, when there's, if they're having a party and they're having a lot of people over, they wind up parking on the grass or something like that. There may be some temptation or opportunity to park in those areas. So the concern that I have is any kind of problem that occurs with the septic system could affect the groundwater. And as an abutter, I'm concerned about my groundwater. So I would just to be sure, and I would ask that the town, before taking a vote on this newly proposed plan, consult with the Board of Health about this particular issue. I've taken the trouble to consult on my own, some local Board of Health in the area, not specific to this development, but in general asking this question. And the comment I received back was that it's ill-advised. I did comment that the developer was planning to use H20 concrete, which is a reinforced concrete, and asked if that comment would still apply. And I was told that yes, it is ill-advised to put that kind of weight on top of a septic system when, regardless of the concrete structure. So I would want our Board of Health to take a detailed look at this and look at the numbers, any kind of numbers that the developer's engineer can provide in terms of demonstrating the structural integrity under an expected weight from either snowpack or a vehicle that may be on that area.
Okay.
So I don't know if this you're showing. Oh, okay. You're showing the snow storage here, so you can see it seems to be right in the same area as where the septic 1 unit 4. I don't know if you overlaid the two. You might see it better, but that's basically what I'm referring to.
Seth, the applicant preliminary. Yep.
I was just going to say that Adam Costa had his hand raised, so he may be wanting to respond. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yep. I couldn't tell. I can't see. But yeah, sure, certainly.
He did. I don't know if he just lowered it.
I did. Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't want to just simply interrupt. I'm going to defer to Seth in a moment because this was a question that had been asked prior to tonight's meeting and had been sent along to us, and we had responded to it. But I'm going to address just the legal issue before I allow Seth to speak to the technical aspects of septic systems and septic tanks and their location and issues concerning the weight of materials above them. I do want to remind the board that the comprehensive permit process on the one hand is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's comprehensive, and the Zoning Board of Appeals stands in the shoes of many local boards, but it only does that, of course, with respect to local permits and approval. So one of the conditions that would be incorporated into a proposed amended decision would that requires us to, and we're obligated to, go to the Board of Health and obtain a Title V permit, which is something that we're required to do under state law. And what Chapter 40B doesn't do is it doesn't shift state law jurisdiction to the Zoning Board of Appeal. So much like we have to go to the Conservation Commission to get our approval under the Wetlands Protection Act, we also have to go to the Board of Health to get our Title V. That is still a requirement. It's still something that we'll need to do. It's not something that we wanted to do or that would make much sense to do prior to having approval of a plan from the Zoning Board of Appeals, but that is something that will occur after this permitting process. With that, Seth, do you want to address the technical aspect of this question?
So Adam,
go ahead, Jared.
Just to be sure. So that type of those structures that he's talking about, the snow on top of the other, that would technically be encompassed within that Title V review by Board of Health. That's what you're saying.
Correct. My point, Mr. Chairman, was that the entire septic system is subject to Title V, subject to Board of Health review. I don't want that to be perceived, however, as me saying that this is an issue, because it is something that I've addressed with Seth, and I think Seth can probably speak to it much more eloquently than I can.
Okay, thank you.
So as it was discussed in the comment, the structures that are in the vicinity of the paved areas, they have a rating on them, and that's referred to as H20, and that's a loading rating. One of the things that came up in the original application, the fire department was concerned there were some structures underneath the proposed turnaround area, and those as well were also rated H20. And as a result of that process, it was determined that the H20 loading rating was capable of supporting the fully loaded fire apparatus when it was on the site. So the structures that are proposed, in short, are capable of supporting the weight of something much larger than the snow load or a typical car. They're in fact capable of supporting a truck on top of them.
So follow-up question, have those calculations been made public and shared with the board in terms of the pounds per square foot of tolerance of the septic system versus the anticipated weight of the snow stored on top of there?
That is not something that was typically provided. The H20 rating in itself is a very high rating. It's the same rating that the manholes and drainage structures within roads have, so they're subject to traffic loads on a daily basis. And once something has that rating, the calculations are not required.
So of course the area of the manhole is a bit smaller than the septic, correct?
We're talking about a tank, and the tank in its entirety has the rating on it.
I just would have thought this would have been something you might have had a calculation for to basically support what you're claiming in generalities here.
They're not generalities. I appreciate your comment, but that rating is sufficient for what proposed.
But you can't quote me a number. I don't know what the weight of a fire truck is.
No, and I'll defer to Attorney Costa. These are issues that will be resolved with the Board of Health. As you mentioned, the plan will be fully reviewed by them.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, there's a meeting on this tomorrow at the Board of Health. I can raise this question at that time.
Hey, Gerard, we have another raised hand by Anastasia Downey.
Okay, please recognize Anastasia.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Is that
okay.
Anastasia?
Awesome, thank you. Anastasia Downey, Still River Road. First and foremost, I want to thank all the little squares on this screen. There's a lot of people who care about this property, and I think that's apparent by this. Also the town and the ZBA specifically, and the selectmen who have worked for a better proposal for our town. And that took a lot of time and a lot of resources, and it is important and it is appreciated. And I want to make sure to publicly, I feel personally that I want to publicly say that to the folks that are in our corner and trying to do the best they can for this town. That said, as this project moves forward, I have a couple just very specific questions about the moving forward process. And they, please forgive me, they may be to different people. It's more about responsibilities moving forward. So, for example, I think it was Mr. McKay or Mr. Costa who mentioned the open space declaration. My question is, who is responsible for following up and making sure that happens in the future?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure. Adam Costa, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to Ms. Downey's question, so that would be the responsibility of the applicant. So as I had alluded to before, and I'll provide a bit of additional details, the ultimate objective of most municipalities, and I feel that I can say this as someone who represents them, is for there to be a conservation restriction approved either through a program like the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, or simply something that is endorsed by Energy and Environmental Affairs that will be in perpetuity so as to protect open space. The problem is that process is a lengthy one. I've negotiated plenty of conservation restrictions on behalf of private clients. I've been involved in the process on behalf of public clients, and that process in a good year might take 3 to 5 months. That process can also take, especially in the current environment with many administrative agencies, staff working remotely and so forth, that process can take much longer than a few months. It can take upwards of a year. And what's been proposed is a two-part process. The first would be a declaration of restriction that is the responsibility of the applicant to prepare. It would be done for review, specifically reviewed by the board. And that document would be recorded in the chain of title to this property. And that would declare a restriction on the 5.5 acres of wetlands and open meadows that are not being disturbed by the project. separately and sort of in conjunction with the recording of that declaration of restriction, there would be a separate conservation restriction, that more comprehensive document that requires the various sign-offs from the town and from the state that would be negotiated and that would be worked through that process. So again, that would be prepared by the applicant initially on a form that is generated by the state. So we don't create our own form. It's a state-specific form. There's one for cultural heritage and there's a separate one for EOEEA. We provide the form first to the town typically to get a review by the board, town council, and acceptable as to form, we would circulate it at the state level for final sign-offs. And once the state has signed off on the form of it, it then gets signatures. It requires signatures of the Conservation Commission, the Board of Selectmen, the applicant, and then the state agency. And that document, again, would be recorded in the chain of title. But the responsibility initially for drafting these documents is the responsibility of the applicant, but they're always subject to review and approval by the town.
6:30.
Thank you.
2 different meetings. I don't understand.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Certainly, go ahead.
Okay. With full respect to the fact that this is a new proposal, my question is, does the developer or the folks that are working with the developer, maybe this is a Seth Donahoe question, plan to file a new wetlands delineation with the Conservation Commission when indeed, with full understanding it's not going to happen now and not in front of this board, but with the Conservation Commission when this comes up in front of the Conservation Commission?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'll attempt to answer that one as well.
Thank you, sir.
So it's Adam Costa again for the applicant. So the intention is to make a complete filing with the Conservation Commission. I think that's what the Conservation Commission is going to expect. And so there were some questions that arose early on in this process when we were before the Zoning Board of Appeals 1.5 years, 2 years ago, about why it was that we hadn't made our filing with the Conservation Commission, why we hadn't submitted a notice of intent as of yet. We were relying upon a delineation that had not been vetted by the Conservation Commission fully yet. We did have an order of conditions for a different project. And the answer we gave at the time, and it's the same answer we give now, is that yes, there are some developers, and especially so with maybe less complex projects where, let's say there's an isolated wetland or a small portion of wetlands on a corner of the property that might opt to pursue their wetlands permitting and their comprehensive permitting simultaneously. A project like this that is more complex, obviously, because of the proximity of the wetlands to some of the development site, it makes good sense to get a comprehensive permit in hand before investing the time and the effort and, to be candid, the money in going before the Board of Health for septic approval or going before the Conservation Commission for wetlands approval. Not to mention that we are requiring certain limited waivers. Even currently, it's a reduction in the total number, for sure. But we're requiring certain limited waivers from local bylaws, including the wetlands bylaw. And so it makes good sense to get those before going to the Conservation Commission. But we do intend to make a full notice of intent filing with the Conservation Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Costa. Erica, any other questions of hands raised?
Yes, Bob Martell has his hand raised again.
Okay. Go ahead, Bob.
Erica, hi, Mr. Chair. It's Bob Martell, 302 Fawn Hill Road. When the original proposal was made, there was some discussion about there being, for lack of a better word, a condo committee or some kind of group responsibility for some of the maintenance in the property. Now that these are single family homes, are they going to be standalone units, or will there be some still sort of property association, and how will that work relative to the original proposal?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, again, this is Adam Costa.
Yes, please, Adam. Thank you.
So I believe at present, and because we're early on in the permitting process, and as I had just alluded to, we have a couple of additional public bodies to go before. I can't say that there's a definitive decision yet that's been made about what form of organization might be created. But in all likelihood, there will be some organizational structure because as you can see here from the plan that is currently on the screen, while they are single-family homes, they're single-family homes that are sharing a septic system in terms of a leaching field, and they're single-family homes that are located on the same lot. There are not individual lot lines proposed here. So as a consequence of that, there will likely need to be some form of association to ensure, maintenance of the shared driveway, maintenance of the septic system. It won't be the same sort of comprehensive, say, condominium association that you might have that, dictates many aspects of how you utilize your unit or what you hang on the exterior of your doors. It may not be quite like that, but certainly there will be some form of organization to coordinate between the four homeowners the maintenance of those shared systems.
And so any type of homeowners agreement, that would be incorporated into the comprehensive permit documentation? The board will get that? Is that correct?
So we have no objection to providing the board with a copy of whatever gets prepared. I will tell you from experience that when I craft condominium documents or homeowners association documents on behalf of private clients, I typically recommend that they include some reference to the existence of the underlying comprehensive permit or whatever local permit or approvals might have issued, so as to ensure that the homeowners are aware. The permit's going to be in the title anyway, so they will be bound by all the restrictions that the developer is bound by. Typically, there is some sort of a reference in that document, and the document is of record. Association documents are typically recorded at the registry of deeds.
Mr. Chairman, if I may comment on that for just a moment.
Certainly, thank you, David McKay.
This is Dave McKay, Town Council. So the under the proposed amended decision, Section 4, or I should say Condition 4, addresses the issue of condominium documents. And it does provide that Still River will submit the condominium documents to the ZBA and to Town Council for review and approval. So we do expect that as a part of the process, and this was particularly done with an eye toward the maintenance of some of the common areas and the, more particularly the common infrastructure with respect to septic and so forth, that the condominium documents would address those issues. So that was an issue that did come up and was addressed in the proposed amended decision.
So thank you.
This is Bob Martell again. I just want to remind the board that this was an area of concern in the original proposal, even with some details disclosed at that time about the proposed condominium documents. There were some questions and concerns at that time about what was proposed, and of course it does affect insurance and responsibilities for upkeep of important things in the area that could affect groundwater. And so it's important for the board to consider that again before casting a vote on this. I know what it says for there, but I believe in the last proposal there was some at least structure of a proposal made for the condominium documents that the board had the opportunity to review. And it doesn't seem like it is the case here. Thank you.
Dave McKay has his hand raised. I'm not sure if he wants to, if he's already spoken or if he's looking to make another comment.
I did, Erica. I just wanted to address Section 4 or Condition 4 of the proposed amended decision that addresses the condominium documents issue.
Great, thank you. Okay, then we do have a chat message from Robin Picarillo. She's asking to make comment or question.
Okay.
Hi, Robin Picarello, 305 On Hill Road. I just want to say we second concerns that have been brought up, and we still have our own concerns. Many are still the same. But when they keep referencing the declaration restriction in wetlands in Meadow, and I just want to clarify, isn't that already part of the conservation restriction with NHESP? Don't they have to do that anyway? So it's not that they're filing it, it's already filed, as far as we know, as a do not disturb area and has to be maintained as a meadow anyway. It's already a restricted area.
Erica, do either of the councils have any comment on that? I can't see.
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Hello?
Yep, Mr. Chairman. This is Adam Costa. So I'll speak to this briefly, and then because Seth Donahoe is the one who has had communications with NHESP, I'll let him speak to it as well, firsthand as opposed to secondhand. So there is a process required in connection with the development of a project of this sort, where the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program is notified of the proposed project and has an opportunity to issue a letter. And that letter may determine that portions of the site shall be restricted for certain purposes. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be subject to a complete conservation restriction of the sort that the EOEA would mandate, but sometimes it does. And so you are correct in that we followed that process as we're required to. In fact, we had followed it with the original project a year and a half ago, notified Natural Heritage, and they issued a letter to that effect. And so when we negotiate, this has not occurred yet, when we prepare a conservation restriction and prior to that a declaration of restriction, we will likely use the NHESP form as opposed to the EOEA. In terms of the scope of that conservation restriction, in terms of what is required by NHESP versus what we're proposing, I look to you, Seth, to tell me whether they're one and the same or whether we're conserving a greater land area than what NHESP has requested.
So I believe the board's aware, but if they're not, the process with NHESP is project specific. And so we have sought their guidance and their input as we're required to do so. That's a separate process outside of the process that we're in right now. And as a result of the last discussion with them, there was a draft declaration of restriction plan where it was volunteered by the applicant, not required by NHESP, that if the previously proposed project were to move forward, they would consider putting a restriction on the remaining 5 and change acres. As a result of discussions with the town, I believe the applicant has now mandated himself to doing that. So what wasn't certain before is now certain. The shape and configuration of that restriction is very similar to what was proposed with the other project. But again, the applicant has offered that as part of the process in the settlement agreement.
Can I just follow up with that, because I'm a little not clear. When the single family was proposed, there was already a declaration, if that's the correct word, with that single family filed by NHESP, correct? So that would have gone along, and then you'd have to speak to the NHESP to make sure you're not going outside the window or giving a little, taking a little, and they approve that as you go along.
If it's all right, I could address that question to the board.
Sure, thank you.
The original single family home did not have a declaration of restriction on the remaining land. There were indeed restrictions in a general term in what can and can't be done with a portion of that land, but it was not as comprehensive as what's being proposed under this agreement now.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to comment on that as well.
Sure.
Dave McKay. So just to sort of highlight a piece of that, the question is well taken, but it is worth noting that under the prior project, the ultimate outcome of exactly what the declaration of restriction would look like and what area would be protected and how that would be protected was not entirely resolved, and the applicant had proposed to restrict, I think, most of the area that would be the protected open space area under the proposed amended decision. But as Mr. Donahue pointed out, what was previously an open question has now been resolved by this condition in condition 5 in the open space protection provision of the proposed amended decision.
Okay. Erica, any other questions or hands up?
Martha Remington has her hand up.
Okay, Martha.
Mr. Chairman, in view of the fact that this property
Martha,
is...
could you just state your name and if you're acting in town or the commission?
Martha Remington, Historical Commission.
Okay, thank you.
In view of the fact that this property is in a very sensitive archaeological resource area, would it be out of order to request that the developer agree that if they find things that are of archaeological value, not necessarily monetarily, that they could be set aside so that someone who is qualified to look at them would be able to, I guess they would belong effectively to the developer. But if there were things that were found, I think it would be a nice gesture that those be brought to the attention of the commission and the state archaeological upper mucky mucks. And I do have
I know that question may have come up during the original comprehensive permit, but I just don't recall if there was a provision there.
We had put it in a letter early on.
Mm-hmm. Either Attorney Costa or Attorney McKay, do you recall in the decision if that's addressed?
I do recall the issue. This is Adam Costa for the applicant. So, Mr. Chairman, I do recall the issue having been raised by Ms. Remington, I think, during the earlier proceedings before the Zoning Board of Appeals. There is no explicit reference in the decision, although if I recall the discussions that were had before the board previously, before the ultimate vote was to deny the project, and there was some discussion of if the project were to move forward, my client had made sort of a general commitment that certainly if it came across items that appeared to be of any sort of archaeological significance, it would be happy as a courtesy as a member of the community to set those aside. We hadn't contemplated it being a condition of the decision at that time, and it hasn't become a condition of the proposed amended decision now. I will tell you, again, as I think we had done previously, and I can see Bob Pace is still at the meeting, so he'll shake his head vehemently left and right if he disagrees with me. But I will tell you that I don't think there's any objection to the developer setting those things aside if in the course of construction, excavation, or whatnot, they come across anything that appears to be of some archaeological significance.
No objection.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Mm-hmm.
I have one other question. Did Harvard agree to let the fire hole on their side of the border be used for this development?
I'm not sure that we had any direct communication with the Harvard Fire Department. Erica, can you respond to that, if possible? Or?
Yeah, I can respond to it to a certain degree. Seth may be able to chime in as well, but my response would be that that's no longer really a relevant topic just because the houses are going to be sprinklered. So there's no need for an outside water source.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thanks, Erica. Okay, any other questions presently from the letters or public comment?
Gerard, there are a couple of more hands raised.
Okay.
Heather Myler has her hand raised. Miller, I apologize if I mispronounced that.
No worries. Heather Myler, 440 Still River Road. I'm the house right across the street, and my only comment is that property is underwater most of the year. I stand at the end of the driveway and stare at it, and I look at that property every single day, and it's not a good place to put a house or four. That's it.
Okay. All right, and then Eric, you said someone else had a hand up?
Anastasia Downey has her hand up again.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Anastasia Downey, Still River Road, super quick. I'm sure it'll be a seamless process and everything's gonna run smoothly. But since everybody's in this meeting, if it doesn't run smoothly, I'm looking for direction from the town in terms of specifically things that have come up, stormwater and trees. Who do we contact if we have concerns?
Dasha, is your question regarding construction, during construction?
During construction.
Yeah, you would want to contact either myself or Rebecca Longvall, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any more Erica questions? I see like 3 in the chat, but I can't tell if those are already answered.
No, I don't believe there are any more comments in chat, and I don't see anyone else that has their hand raised.
Okay. So I want to be sure we give ample opportunity to the town, the butters or just town people in the hearing, because for them it's the first time they've had an opportunity they've seen some documents but not really asked the questions of the people that are on this. But if that is sort of tapped out as far as for questions or observations or comments at the time, then I think, unless the board has any other questions or board members, then maybe at this point we should consider whether to close the public hearing portion of the hearing. Any feedback from the board members on that?
I had one further question. This is Bob Martell, 302 Vaughn Hill Road.
Okay, let's get that in before we move on to the next aspect of this, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you at liberty to discuss anything that took place during the negotiation phase of this project?
It's pretty general, but
that's my specific question. So I've heard on a couple occasions the point raised that during the negotiation there were a number of things considered, including an alternate site for this project. I was wondering what the alternate site proposal was and why it was rejected as a plausible alternative to the currently proposed project.
I can't speak to that. It may have been prior to when the board was brought into the process, but I think the law committee, Stan Wysocki, made that comment, so to the extent he can answer that. Otherwise, I'd have to reserve that to maybe town council to confirm if that's something that's just being discussed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to address that.
Okay.
Okay, so this is Dave McKay from Myrick O'Connell Town Council. So we did, I'm hesitant to get into too many of the specifics of the negotiation. I will say that the negotiations occurred over a fairly extended period of time and ultimately got to the product that you see here in terms of the settlement agreement and the proposed amended decision. The conversation with respect to alternate sites was not an alternate site for the entire project. That conversation was whether or not some combination of development at this particular site along with development at another site or construction of an affordable housing unit or units at other sites might be sufficient to get a deal done. And I can't even remember the specifics of that discussion, but I will hopefully allay your concern that I don't have any memory of any of those discussions being, a significantly smaller project at the Still River site than what the parties are talking about here and what is before the Zoning Board of Appeals tonight. Those discussions, I will say, were really more in the spirit of exploring all potential opportunities to resolve the dispute. And so in that context, if my memory serves me correctly, there was a single lot for a single family home that was reserved as affordable from another project, and could that be wrapped into the resolution of this dispute? And ultimately that just became, there seemed to be too many obstacles to confront in making some combination of approaches involving other sites. And so we focused on this particular site and what would it take to get an agreement that would both be acceptable to the law committee, acceptable to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and acceptable to the applicant as well.
Okay, thank you, David. I think there was a question that came up in the chat while you were speaking, David, about the condominium documents and the timing. But I believe as is shown on the screen when you speak about condominium documents, that the timing of when the board would receive those would be prior to the issuance of the first certificate of occupancy. So I think that's
correct, Mr. Chair.
That's still okay.
That's correct, and it's built. It's drafted and structured in that way, kind of on purpose, because it gives the developer the incentive to get the condominium documents done in advance. And if they don't, then their certificates of occupancy for the units could be held up. So the developer has all the incentive to get that process done and into the Zoning Board of Appeals and into Town Council sooner rather than later.
Right, and then it obligates us to then, without undue or without review, is to do a timely review of those as well.
Right.
Okay. Erica, any other? I happen to see that chat come up. What was typed in, but are there any more follow-up questions before we consider whether we close the public hearing portion?
Sure. It looks like Kathy Anestis has a question.
Okay.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of quick questions. Will trees be marked that either have to stay or that are okay to be removed?
Kathy, can you please identify yourself and your?
Oh, sorry, Kathy Anestis, 448 Still River Road.
Okay, thank you.
Will trees be marked that either have to stay or to be removed, so we know what we're to be keeping our eye out for?
Seth, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
For clarification, trees along the front within the right-of-way, that would be subject to a meeting with the tree warden. And then the removal, we show the proposed limit of clearing, which is essentially limited to only 2 of the units at this site now. We show those lines on the plan. Individual trees are not routinely marked for something like that, but prior to the start of construction, the limit of clearing would be flagged by a professional land surveyor. I would fully anticipate that the Conservation Commission would require that they walk the site or their agent walk the site at that time, and they would view and make sure that everything is ready for the tree removal in that area.
Okay, and will the driveway go into pretty much where the cut-in is right now?
If I may address that to the board, the driveway is in a similar location. It is not in the exact same location as where the existing cart road to the site is now.
So it's moved further, I don't know, north or south, but it's further towards Vaughan Hill.
Correct.
Okay, and then I have one more question. Is there any recourse if something happens to our wells across the street, or are we just out of luck?
All right, Attorney Costa, would you like to address that?
I can address that. Thank you, Seth. And to the extent that Attorney McKay wants to advise the town, I'll defer to him doing that. That's not my role. What I will say is that this is a concern that residents often have in any community with development project, the what ifs. And I heard a reference made earlier in the meeting tonight to negligence, for example. What happens if this should occur or that should occur as a result of negligence, as a result? Well, I mean, it's no different than any other project that might be built as a subdivision full of single family homes, for example, that could be built as of right without a comprehensive permit, or a single family home that could be built with nothing more than a building permit. There are certainly risks involved with any sort of construction project. I can't tell you otherwise. What I can tell you is that the benefit with respect to a comprehensive permit or any other project that requires significant permit from a local municipal board is that you have page after page after page of permit conditions that must be complied with. And there are mechanisms for enforcement of those permit conditions by the board that issues the permit, in this case, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then also by the zoning enforcement official, which is the building inspector. So if issues arise through the course of construction, as the units themselves, the homes themselves begin to be occupied, if issues arise, there is a mechanism where complaints can be made, and the zoning enforcement official, the Zoning Board of Appeals, can take appropriate action to try and rectify the issue, which is more than you would get with the average run-of-the-mill development that wouldn't be subject to these sorts of conditions.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Attorney Costa. Okay. Have we exhausted questions, Erica?
I believe so.
Okay. So if that's the case, then does any of the board members have any consideration whether we should close the public hearing? Do they have any final comments or any final questions? And if not, then do we need a motion to close the public hearing portion?
I do not. This is Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Are the other board members on mute, or you could please just confirm that you're okay with the potential to close the public hearing portion?
I have no further
Yep,
questions.
I'm fine. No further questions.
I don't have any further questions, no.
Thank you, Brad. So it seems like
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Just before you close the public hearing, and perhaps in an abundance of caution, Erica, can you confirm that there's no one else that has raised their hand and no other members of the public that have any comments or questions?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I see no raised hands, and I'm going back through the chat line. I don't see any other comments or questions in the chat.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we hadn't cut anybody off.
I don't believe so.
I thought we had made that comment, but
Yeah.
thanks for clarifying that. So if that being the case, do you have a motion to close the public hearing portion?
I will make a motion to close the public hearing.
I will second that.
All right. Erica, do you want to do the vote on that?
Yeah, so all in favor by roll call, Gerard Ahern,
Yes.
Brian Holmes,
Yes.
Andy Kishitz,
Yes.
Bradley Reed,
Yes.
Kay Stoner.
Yes.
Okay. So question for, so the motion to close the public hearing portion was accepted. So just a quick question to Attorney McKay. There were a lot of highlights yellow in the amended decision. As part of the board deliberation, should we review that and put in answers to those, or those pro forma where they'll just get put in dates and times?
Mr. Chairman, my expectation is that those are pro forma, and what I would suggest is that if the board is inclined to vote the amended decision, that we that the board can do so, with the caveat that changes and updates to the amended decision for those portions of the decision that are highlighted in brackets can be done by town council. So the ultimate form of the amended decision will be subject to my review and, of course, Mr. Chairman, your review as well, assuming that you're going to sign on behalf of the board.
Okay. So thank you for that explanation. So and then one follow-up. So the topic that Martha Remington from the Historical Commission brought up with regard to any significant archaeological finds that would be set aside, well, they weren't a condition. There was an affirmative from the developer as well as the applicant's attorney that they would certainly, as a courtesy, set those aside. Do we have to memorialize that with a document, or is that just part of the public record for Zoom?
If the board can ask if the applicant is willing to have that added as a condition of the special permit, and if so, we can add language to that effect, or if the board's comfortable leaving that as a commitment made by the applicant during the public hearing process. If that's the board's wish, then that can be done as well. So that's I can handle it in either way. It's subject to how the board wants to handle it and how the applicant would like to handle it.
Okay. So with regard to the board members, does anyone have a particular preference on that, where it can just be, do we want a specific condition put into the amended decision, or just have that handled after the fact?
I'd like to put in, this is Brian.
Mm-hmm.
I would concur, Brad.
Yeah,
Okay. So
I would as well. Yeah.
Okay. So with that said, Attorney McKay, is that something we'd have to craft a potential amendment statement right now and have the applicant agree to it? Or is that something that they would just send over or something to you where you would incorporate it?
I think we can, I would reserve the language until later. If the board is seeking a specific commitment to that kind of a condition from the applicant, then we should get that as part of this process.
Okay. So would the request go to Attorney Costa to commit that they would agree to have that condition added to the amended decision?
Correct. That would have to be an agreement by Mr. Costa and his client.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'll make that request to Attorney Costa at this point, and from the board's perspective, to see if they would be amenable to having a condition with regard to the any significant find of archaeological significance set aside for review by the Historical Commission and whatever required agencies.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'm not going to deviate from what I said earlier. Certainly, I have no objection, and my client didn't have any objection to making a good faith effort to set aside anything that is of archaeological significance. The only thing that I would maybe suggest to the board, and I guess this can be dealt with one of two ways. One way would be, rather than make it a condition, there is a section of the amended decision. In fact, it's one of those sections highlighted in yellow to be completed, where the board is entering additional testimony that was received. So maybe in lieu of a condition, you could address it as a commitment that was made by the applicant if you choose to incorporate it as a condition. Again, I don't know that's a strong objection, but I would hope that it would be crafted as such, and the language would be used to sort of acknowledge the reality that this will be a construction site. So I know, for example, that with incredibly sensitive archaeological sites where there is evidence that there are archaeological finds beneath the soil, there would be all sorts of prohibitions on the use of machinery, for example. You would have to hand dig portions of the site. That's not what's being proposed here. So certainly, if in the course of excavation with machinery or otherwise, it's determined that there is something of archaeological significance uncovered, we will immediately set it aside. My client has okayed that. But we're not going to in those sort of delicate methodologies that might be used if we knew we were a site where there was something immediately beneath the soil.
Okay. All right, thank you for that elaboration, at least. So, Attorney McKay, then, that recommendation of, within one of the yellow highlights, putting in that discussion of the good faith effort, does that sound amenable? And to the board members, does that sound amenable? I think it probably would satisfy my concern that, I want to document it somehow that they've agreed to show a good faith effort to provide, that service.
It's good for me.
Okay.
And so, Mr. Chairman, that's language that we can put into what is now paragraph 4 of the discussion and findings. And again, this is something that is subject to, I think, the board's wish on how to proceed. So that can be drafted later, subject to your review and approval, or if it's the board's desire to have the entire amended decision before then with all of the dates and the particulars filled in, we can do that as well.
Okay. All right. So good. Then I believe that at least address that concern that it's documented in the comprehensive permit.
And so just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, so what you've closed the public hearing, and so that would be technically a part of the board's deliberations in terms of the final language that goes into that discussion and findings paragraph section 4 with regard to other testimony presented at the public hearing. So again, that's subject to how the board would like to proceed on that. If the board is comfortable delegating that to you for your final review as part of the review and signature process of the decision, the board can proceed in that fashion. If the board wants to see the entire document in front of them before they authorize the execution of the proposed amended decision, they can proceed in that way as well.
Okay. So feedback from the board on that?
I'm fine with you. I'm fine, Gerard, with you seeing that and signing.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
This action would not affect the negotiated settlement agreement in any way. It would only be part of our decision or subsequent decision.
That's my
Mr. Chairman?
Correct. Yes.
So I'm happy to address that too. It will be in the decision. It won't change. So the the settlement agreement includes as an exhibit the proposed amended decision. The proposed amended decision left open sort of some blanks to get filled in. And the requirement under the settlement agreement is that the amended decision be consistent with this form and consistent with what was agreed to at the public hearing. So I know that's not a precise answer to your question, but there is enough flexibility in the settlement agreement and in the sort of blanks that we left to be filled in the settlement agreement in the amended decision to address this issue.
Okay, so there's some sort of dragnet clause that takes anything that's mentioned in the discussion and pulls it into the settlement agreement.
Correct. So the settlement agreement, references the amended decision, and then the amended decision itself has a series of open brackets, if you will, of areas that we knew we would have to fill in at a later date. So, for example, they can be simple things such as when was the notice of the public hearing actually published? When we signed the settlement agreement, or when the settlement agreement was signed, we didn't know when that was actually going to happen. And there is a similar reservation, I should say, for testimony and things of that nature at the public hearing itself.
Right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this certainly suits that sort of section for sort of elaboration of the testimony from tonight's public hearing. Okay, so if that is that sort of wraps that aspect up. So at this point, do we have a motion to consider whether to approve the amended decision? I see all our members are on mute. Erica, could you see if people are on mute? And
yeah, I'm fine with that. Do we have to, if we make a motion to approve the amended decision, what else do we have to add in there, just from a verbiage standpoint, to make sure we're doing that appropriately?
Do we have to discuss each waiver too, or not?
Well, the waivers that are in there, in the amended decision, they were discussed in sort of the sessions, and they have the approvals in them.
I know in a past decision we walked through each waiver, but I didn't know if that was relevant to this one.
Well, I think the past decision was because we were reaching the decision and we walked through them, and I think we opined on some and we denied others, but I think as part of the mediation or this process, we had confirmed that they were approved. I don't know if we need a second walkthrough. Is that my understanding correct, Attorney McKay?
Right. So the last time, because of the number of waivers and the board's desire to address each of those specifically, and perhaps again in an abundance of caution, each of the requested waivers were voted separately. You don't have to do that. Each of those waivers are identified specifically in the decision itself. So a decision to, or I should say, a vote by this board to approve the decision and to authorize the chair to sign it on behalf of the board, subject to review of town council and completion of those sections that are identified in brackets. The board can proceed in that fashion if it wishes to tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. So why don't we first have if someone could motion to approve the amended decision, and then I think we'll do separate motions to address Attorney McKay's discussion about the motion to then authorize the chair to sign, and then a motion to regarding the writing and filing of the amended decision to allow myself, Erica, and town council to work to finalize the documents as they, the final inputs and dates and things get put in. So why don't we start with the first one, the motion to approve the amended decision.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Sure.
My suggestion would actually be in this instance to take those together. Because
okay.
what I wouldn't want the record to show is an approval of the amended decision simply as written. I think you want to build into that vote that and note that those bracketed areas will be reviewed and completed. So again, my suggestion is to take those together, and if there is such a motion, to make it a motion to approve the amended decision, subject to the additions and revisions that'll be done by town council and approved by the chair, and that the chair is so authorized once those bracketed additions to the amended decision are made to sign it on behalf of the board.
Okay. So would one of the members make that motion?
I will make a motion, yeah. I will make a motion that we approve the amended document subject to the inclusion of the bracketed documents in their final form as put together by town council and approved and reviewed by our chairman.
Second.
Okay. And could we only amend that to allow Erica to have a review of that document? Because oftentimes she's working with town council to finalize some of the documents.
So you want me to add Erica to the stream?
Just to the review in potential documents, because sometimes she's trading the document with the not.
Adding that to our chairman, we will have Erica as well review the document before it is finally signed off.
Okay.
Second.
We have a second on that. Okay. Erica, could you do a roll call vote on that, or? Is Erica on mute?
My apologies. I'm here. Roll call. All in favor. Gerard Ahern.
Yes.
Brian Holmes.
Yes.
Andy Kistitz.
Yes.
Bradley Reed.
Yes.
Kay Stoner.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. So the motion to accept the amended decision, subject to completing the section with input has been passed. Okay. With that, do we have a motion to close this hearing? Adjourn this hearing?
I will make a motion to close the hearing.
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Erica, roll call.
All in favor. Gerard Ahern.
Yes.
Brian Holmes.
Yes.
Andy Kistitz.
Yes.
Bradley Reed.
Yes.
Kay Stoner.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you folks for participating in another 2-year journey on a 40B project. So appreciate the participation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of the board.
Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Thanks very much, everyone.
So,
stay safe.
Yep. Everyone stay safe. Erica, I see on your outline we have minutes to approve, but I don't recall seeing any. Are there minutes?
Yeah, I asked the board that we move the approval of minutes to our next meeting.
Okay. It works for me.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I would make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. Was that seconded? Okay.
All in
Roll
favor
call
by roll call. Gerard Ahern.
Yes.
Brian Holmes,
Yes.
Andy Kistitz,
Yes.
Bradley Reed,
Yes.
and Kay Stoner.
Yes.
All right. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Great, thank you. Good night.
Appreciate your participation. Good night.
Bye-bye.